Now that we can associate a blog post with a particular author, obviously the next step is to click on the author to see only the blog posts that they specifically wrote. Let's get on that. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. Have a look. If I bring up PHP Artisan Tinker, let's run a command to whip up a generic post. So post factory create. Okay, and it has this title that I can't pronounce. If I switch to Firefox, I should see it at the top, right? It's the most recent blog post. However, it actually gets added to the bottom. Okay, that's an easy fix. Back to PHP Storm, we'll go to our routes file. And you'll notice right here, grab all posts, eager load the category, and get the results. Notice that it didn't include an order, which means it starts with the oldest one first. I could instead switch it up by saying, give me the latest posts. And that behind the scenes basically adds an order by constraint. And you can even add a column here. So maybe if you have a published at column, you could sort them according to that column. So now if we switch back and give it a refresh, notice how this one will jump to the top. And there it is. That's what we want. Great. Next, related to fetching the author, let's think about it. If we have a look down here, when we show a post, we load a view. And within that view, we fetch the author of the post like this. And that's fine, but as much as you can, try to get the code to reflect the way you speak about the domain, even if it's as simple as a blog. So in this case, would you refer to the user of the post, or would you instead say the author of the post? And if the answer is author, well, let's try to change this so I can instead write code that reflects the way I speak. Right now, though, of course, that's not going to work. So if we give this a refresh, it fails because there is no author relationship. Okay, well, let's see. Is it as easy as going to our post model and changing this to author? And the answer is no, not quite. So if I come back and give this a refresh, it still fails. Now here's the issue. The name that you use for your relationship methods is important. Laravel is going to read this name and make certain assumptions based on it. In this case, it's assuming that the foreign key will now be called author ID. Whereas if you had foobar, it's going to assume the foreign key is foobar, right? So notice when we had user, well, it assumed a foreign key of user ID. And if we go to table plus, sure enough, on the post table, the foreign key is user ID. So it works out. And when you can, try to stick with these conventions. But in our case, and like will often be the case for you, the database column doesn't match up with how we currently speak of it. So we need to override it. Here's how. If I click through to the belongs to relationship, we can optionally pass in a second argument for the name of the foreign key. Okay, so let's try this. Let's bring it back to author and then say the foreign key is not author ID, it's actually user ID. Okay, so now if I come back to Firefox and give it a refresh, it works once again, but now, like we discussed, the benefit is your code reflects the way you speak, the author of the post. So with that in mind, if I come on back, maybe we should now display the author of the post on the overview page. Okay, let's do that together. We'll start on the routes page. We will follow it through. Okay, go to the post view. And once again, we'll use that same shape, by John Doe in the given category. So we'll get something like that. But again, the username should be clickable. So why don't we just go to the post view and copy this whole thing? Like so. Now we could do this, and I bet it's going to work. And it does. And don't be confused, we actually have a John Doe in our system. But notice up here, that's correct. But don't forget about that N+1 problem. So if I open up Clockwork that we installed a few episodes ago, we can see that pretty clearly in the database tab. Right here, there's your N+1 problem. And that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? We fetched all posts, and then we looped over each post, and for each one, we loaded the corresponding author. And when you lazy load it, you got to perform an SQL query to find the associated user in this case. Now we can fix that by returning to our routes file and say, give me the post with the category and also the author. So now if we come back and refresh, let's have a look yet again in Clockwork. and we'll see in the database tab, we've solved that n+1 problem. Alternatively, if you wish, you can add these as an array. So you could say with the category and also the author. It doesn't matter. Same thing, and you'll get the same results. So let's now finally add a new page to view all posts written by each author. Let's do this. Right down here at the bottom, maybe I can copy this to save some time. And we're going to say, if you visit /authors/ the author, that should then fetch us the user. So we'll say user. And remember, we want to call it author in this case so that it matches up with the wildcard. Okay, so have a look. If I were to quickly indump the author, and we now visit authors/1, sure enough, we get the attributes for that specific user. Okay, so next, if we have a user and we want to fetch the posts written by that user, we've already set up that relationship. So this should be fairly easy. Load the posts written by the author. All right, let's cross our fingers, we give it a refresh, and now I see only the posts written by John Doe. Let's try somebody else. I think we have an author with an ID of 4. Yeah, there's Darlene. It works. So now we only have to wire up that link. Let's go to the post view, and the link is going to be authors/ and then the post author ID. And again, we will copy that. We do have a little duplication here. You could extract that to a component if you want, but for now, I'm going to leave it like so. So we come back to Firefox, and we should now have a way to view only the posts created by Darlene or John Doe. It works, but we still have that problem where we're using the ID in the URI. Now, in some cases, this is totally fine, it doesn't matter, but I'd rather see the person's name there. That way, if you know the person you're looking for, you could update that address bar on your own. Whereas otherwise, you have no idea which person corresponds to which database ID. So let's see. If I were to change this up, we could do name, but think about it. One problem with that is how the name is really a full name here, and that's not great for a URI. So maybe we could distinguish between a person's full name and their selected username. Why don't we give that a shot? To make it work, we'll have to return to our users table, and we're going to add a new column here for a username that needs to be unique. Next, while we're here, we should go ahead and update the database factory to include that. And Faker has an option here for a unique username. So that should do the trick. Okay, so we've updated our migration, we've updated the factory. Let's now run PHP Artisan migrate fresh and seed the database, like you learned about in the last episode. So if we switch to Table Plus, yeah, we now have a generic username for each user. And in this case, I'm just going to hard code it to John Doe to make it a little nicer. Okay, so how many posts do we have here? We have 5 posts. So we come back and refresh. That's what we want. Okay, so now the only remaining step is to visit our post view and change this to author username, and we'll make sure that's reflected on both pages here. Finally, in your routes file, when you visit an author, we're not going to grab the ID. We actually want to use the username as the key. Okay, and cross your fingers. We'll go to John Doe. We see all of his posts, but notice how much cleaner the URI is.